Hello, and welcome to episode 4 of the Gnosis and Science podcast. I am your host, Nicholas Thumb, and this episode, titled East of Eden, the Physics of Sin and Recursive Closed Time Curves, I would like to examine and bring into question how we view time. Normally, we view things as having a linear progression of cause and effect, a beginning and an end. But what if that's not the case? What if time is cyclical and non-linear? First, looking at ancient Stoic cosmology with thinkers like Heraclitus and Marcus Aurelius, as they answer what is the ultimate fate of the universe, while drawing parallels to a similar line of thought from the Gospel of Mary, while also looking at parallel ideas discussed in the story of Genesis, where Adam and Eve are expelled from the garden, along with modern ideas from Kurt Gödel, a famous logician, mathematician, and philosopher from the mid-20th century. Specifically, his work focusing on finding a loophole in Einstein's theory of general relativity, effectively breaking it, which he happened to give to Einstein as a type of belated birthday gift. So, what are friends for, right? First, let's look at the Stoic idea of epikairosis, or cosmic fire. The Stoics were materialists. What really exists can be act upon something and be acted upon by something else. This is the same line of thought that atheists have, where if something is only real if it is actually able to be proven through having a physical effect. In which case we need to ask and define what qualifies as real. Is it just physical matter? And at this point, what about thoughts, ideas, and consciousness itself? And what about larger scale expressions of consciousness that can influence us through subconscious thought patterns? Even if they become immaterial at some point, is that not being acted upon? So at this point, you need to question what qualifies as realness. And it has nothing to do with actual physicality, but the influence. But that's for another time. The Stoics saw God as an active cause in the universe, while also being a passive force that is acted upon, embodying both masculine and feminine aspects, even if they wouldn't have phrased it this way. But we can draw parallels between this dualistic thinking from Buddhism. And it's worth noting that this line of reasoning, you cannot separate the force that acts from that which is acted upon, as they are not two distinct things. So Heraclitus and later Stoics defined God as an active designing fire, like a craftsman. They also believed the universe was spherical, continuous, and indivisible. The Stoics believed the universe's original state was a divine fire of wisdom, where differentiation is refined into a divine unity of wisdom. They also thought that these distinct elements that make up reality would eventually return to this original state of divine fire, along with our universe being surrounded by a void. And if God makes creation with complete wisdom, it can be assumed that these same choices would be made again and again during these recursive cyclical processes of conflagration and rebirth, with every cycle being the same. This is the idea of eternal recursion And it brought a sense of peace to them, with the idea that nothing is truly permanent. So your current situation, struggles, and circumstances will all pass. But this would make most modern people question, doesn't it just mean an amount that the same choices are going to repeat over and over, so it doesn't matter what I do? The answer is no. All timelines and versions of you exist at the same time. You can make any choice you want. It's just that this current incarnation can only experience time linearly, so we only experience this single timeline. Like how a particle of light must take every single path from point A to B, and we just happen to see the one path that is the most likely, as all alternate paths have deconstructively interfered, while the one we see is the one that has had the highest probability, where all the paths have constructively interfered, and hence we just see that one path. So now I would like to look at a similar idea touched on the Gospel of Mary, a Gnostic text from the 3rd to 6th century CE. And it is presented as a Q&A between Mary Magdalene and Jesus post-resurrection. So rather than focusing on the actual sacrifice of him dying on the cross and the subsequent miracle of being brought back to life, it actually focuses far more on his actual teachings. And he touches on the idea and concept of sin not existing as a separate substance or some sort of weight, but arises when things act in accordance to their nature in a disordered way. This is very similar to the Stoic idea of aligning actions with nature, reason, and virtue. So wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, rather than impulsive emotions. And don't get it twisted. This isn't to say like you shouldn't feel your emotions. In fact, you should. That's how you get to this point of non-impulsive reaction. You have to do shadow work and look at, why do I react this way? This isn't trying to twist something into a sort of like toxic masculinity where you just suppress everything. So at one point, the disciples ask about the fate of creation, at which point Jesus responds that all nature's formations and all created things are intermingled and will again be resolved into their respective roots. Again, similar to the idea of God being both the active and receptive force that is mixed with the material as these subsequent elements change in density. And this idea of disordered degeneration through this process of separation, followed by conflagration, with material form breaking down and returning to its underlying condition, and the spiritual essence or spirit returning upwards to its source, the divine, the Father, but also Spirit, and also the Son. And the Son isn't just Jesus in this case. The Son is divine will made manifest. It is all of us. So spirit and soul will separate from the physical world. The soul originates from a higher divine source, and through knowledge and gnosis gained through self-reflection and understanding, it becomes free, no longer being bound by this material matrix, returning upward beyond forces that actually govern matter. Now let's look at Genesis. So in Genesis, the garden is placed in Eden. And when Adam and Eve are expelled, they travel east further from the center where God resides. And later, Cain is exiled, and it mentions that he moves eastward. He travels further east. And then his descendants travel even further east. So each act that identifies the self more firmly with the body and mind increases the distance from God or the center. It's a centrifugal motion of consciousness moving outward away from presence into differentiation, narrative, history, and linear time. Remember, the alpha, pure potential, and omega point, fully expended kinetic energy, aren't opposites at an infinite distance. They are two ends of this scale invariant axis that loop back on themselves, meeting in the center, creating a toroidal or electromagnetic field. The center point is God. It is unified source. And all souls move away from this center, descending the scale invariant axis through fragmentation. They experience gravity, and gravity isn't just physical mass, it's an expression of coherence of consciousness within these higher and lower densities. The more fragmented you are, the heavier you become. The more integrated, the lighter. This is why spiritual traditions speak of ascending or raising your vibration or walking lightly. You're literally moving back toward the center, reducing gravitational pull by increasing coherence. So in this framework, sin, or from the Greek hamartia, missing the mark, is any action or pattern that increases this fragmentation, that pulls you further east, further from the center, further down the axis. So it's not just a moral failure, it's a directional misalignment. You're moving away from integration, away from self-understanding, and away from coherence. So every time we act from unconscious patterns instead of awareness, and identify with ego instead of the observer, and choose separation over unity, we are traveling eastward, increasing the distance and adding gravitational weight. So how do you know where you are? How do you navigate this nonlinear higher density space-time when you can't see the whole map? You have to listen to your intuition. It operates like a inertial navigation system. This is the same technology that we use in submarines and spacecrafts when GPS isn't available, so we can't triangulate our position. So inertial navigation works through what's known as dead reckoning, where we are measuring acceleration and time to calculate a position without an external reference point. So it uses accelerometers to detect changes in velocity and then integrates these changes over time and produces a trajectory. So your soul does the exact same thing. So accelerometers are our rate of integration, and how fast are we integrating subconscious patterns. And this is what changes our velocity along the scale invariant axis. It's essentially our spiritual acceleration. So time, as we've established in previous episodes, is relative to our level of self-awareness. The more we recognize ourselves as the observer, not just body or mind, the less linear time feels, because our perception of time is created from the object-observer phenomenon and is our position measurement. It reveals how fragmented or integrated we are. So by continuously measuring our rate of integration, acceleration, and our relative time or awareness or position, our intuition can calculate the trajectory of our soul. So it knows where we are along the axis and which direction we're moving, and it also knows the path of least action back towards the center. So those little intuitive nudges or hits that you get that don't make any logical sense, when you surrender and follow those, that's you following the path of least action. So just like inertial navigation and intuition operates internally, no external signal is actually needed. It's just pure self-reference. So measuring your own acceleration and your own time dilation, your own movement through these different levels of consciousness. This is why your intuition is quiet and not a loud external command. It's a feedback loop of the soul calculating its own trajectory through higher density space-time. And when we ignore our intuition and act from ego to reestablish control and a sense of safety that is ultimately false, that arises from identifying with the body and mind, we're ignoring this navigation system and we're drifting further east or further from the center, accumulating gravitational karmic weight. And when we follow this intuition, even when it doesn't make sense, we are aligning with God's plan or the path of least action. So now that we've looked at this idea of recursive time loops and how we navigate them through the lens of Stoic philosophy and theology, how do we tie this into modern science? To do that, we will look at the work of Kurt Gödel. Now, I want to talk about Einstein's field equation and general relativity. And he presented this kind of loophole, Kurt, on his birthday. So whenever there's a point in space and time, there are return loops that bring you back to the location before you left. So there's a kind of 45-degree angle, which is the speed of light. And if we plot this, it would essentially be a point with a 45-degree angle in front and a 45-degree angle in back. So you can only affect paths in this future light cone, the one pointing forward, and the past light cone is all possible choices and paths that you could have made that have brought you to this current present moment. You could take anything in the future cone and could have taken anything in the past. And these are called time-like paths because your motion up through time is greater than your motion sideways. So in these paths that are outside this cone, they're called space-like paths. So the more space is traveled in time, which should make it impossible to influence them or to have them influence you. And then once you move faster than the speed of light, you appear to move backwards. This is you breaking free of your light cone. So gravity and your warping of space-time is bending your light cone into a specific type of rotating black hole called a Kerr black hole. And there's a theorized zone called a Cauchy horizon. It's an event horizon where angular motion becomes time-like because space-time spins so quickly, and a circular path gets you back to where you started. This is called a closed time-like curve, or a closed timeline curve, a CTC. And then there's also what's known as frame dragging, which is the twisting of space-time due to a rotational mass. So we can see this happening with a gyroscope on a satellite orbiting Earth, where it will slowly start to swivel from its original orbit due to this twisted space-time, but also the Earth's rotation. And which causes this frame dragging effect. So going back to my work on how gravity is a byproduct of the coherence of consciousness within this reality, but also higher forms of consciousness, with our own consciousness operating on the same principle, just on a smaller scale, along with our intuitive guidance and our consciousness acting as a kind of gyroscope to navigate higher reality in nonlinear space-time, we can see how this physics maps to consciousness. We are both the observer and object. We are both the satellite and the mass that it is rotating around, depending on the observer and object relation. So we can realize this frame dragging effect can break causality if it happens in a space-time where the effect can add up. To do this, space-time must have a fundamental twist to it, where everywhere with all these points are feeling the same frame dragging effect. This is one of the prerequisites to this idea actually being able to hold ground. Now, this is called global velocity, where all points rotate relative to their neighbors, like there's a vortex. So world lines in this infinite 4D space-time that has no actual center. And there are two more requirements where there has to be a negative curvature or a hyperbolic geometry, which is needed to allow for this centerless rotation, and a smooth positive matter and negative dark energy to keep this universe static in size. So this ties back into my framework with the soul acting as the hyperbolic anti-de Sitter space within ADS CFT string theory, with it serving as the event horizon of individuality. So you are the center of your universe, but also every single other being is the center of their own universe, so there is no actual center, because it's all just a holographic projection preserved on the event horizon, giving the illusion of three-dimensional depth. And as we navigate higher realities and these subconscious influences of higher scale expressions of consciousness, through our inherent guidance acting as a gyroscope, and we're bringing the subconscious into conscious awareness, we are slowly escaping these closed time curves that play out through repeating karmic cycles and relationship dynamics that act as mirrors to show us where we are or are not meeting and understanding ourselves, leading to the evolution of the soul through self-understanding and gnosis, and eventually returning to God, consciousness, unity, the divine fire. All to just do it again and again, over and over. This is the idea of no thing equally nothing. It's not referring to a void or blackness, but the idea of no separation from all that is, when a thing cannot be divisible to anything else, as there's nothing else outside it to be divisible from. So at which point, wouldn't it make sense that if you were that infinite, it would get rather boring? Like you'd be stuck in a white room. So wouldn't it make sense that infinity would split and fragment itself into smaller scale expressions to learn about itself? Because it's fun, right? You might as well have fun. Well, that was this episode. I'm sure it was a lot. If you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them. I've got a course I made combining spirituality and science. I'll be sure to put a link to that in the description. And I'll catch you in the next one. Yeah.